I'm Nicola Foley, and this is the Let's Talk About podcast. Let's Talk About was created to highlight important issues and bring back the art of conversation, because everybody has a story to tell, right? My first two podcasts cover a subject very close to my heart, not only because I have it as a comorbidity of autism, but also because it's misunderstood with a bad rap, and I've always fought for the underdog. Let's talk about ADHD. What does ADHD mean to you?
Hyperactivity, disruption,
anxiety, a brain that comes up with the most amazing ideas. When you try to make these ideas a reality, there's no start button.
The wee person that doesn't get invited anywhere, or no sleepovers, or no, you can't play with them because of the perceived unpredictability of neurodiverse kids.
ADHD is a complex neurological condition often misunderstood. This leads to stigma that can negatively impact lives of those affected.
Well, the key things really is concentration, forgetfulness, easily distracted, and I suppose inattentiveness as well. Trying to get him to focus is not easy, even though he does take medication.
By the time parents come to us, they're at a crisis point in their life. We're seeing the effects of the stigma and the misunderstanding through the attitude that they have experienced towards them as parents. I think our parents often feel very judged.
Lorna Fotheringham of Perth and Kinross ADHD group supports families and individuals with ADHD. I asked her what she wanted people to know about the condition.
The key message is that ADHD is not a choice. It's a neurodiverse condition. The more we can share neurodiversity and what it means and what it looks like, the better for all these people who are amazing and fantastic.
So is understanding ADHD the key to dispelling stigma? Farmer Hugo Maynell has 2 children with ADHD. 3 years ago, he was diagnosed with the condition himself, and I wanted to know if that had changed his attitude towards them.
Yes, 100%. That was an easy question to answer. From my side, there's a considerable amount more sympathy and empathy going towards the boys, learning to have more patience with them, and actually still working with them, not against them. You can't change who you are, but you can change how you operate.
To gain a better understanding, I spoke with Dr. Tony Lloyd, a child and adolescent psychotherapist who has been CEO of the ADHD Foundation UK since 2011. He also has ADHD himself.
Hi, Nikki.
Hi, how you doing? If someone said to you ADHD was just naughty young boys, what would you say to them?
I would tell them that they were ill-informed and completely mistaken about their understanding of what ADHD is and isn't.
Do you think fear of being misunderstood influences somebody's decision to seek help or get a diagnosis?
Yes, it certainly puts a lot of adults off because they will struggle, but they won't identify with the stereotype. So they will go through their lives thinking, okay, I've got difficulty concentrating, I am forgetful, and I've got poor executive functioning skills. But I am not a naughty, feral child, so and I'm academically gifted and I've got a degree, so I can't possibly have ADHD, which we know is complete utter nonsense.
It's clear that something needs to change, but how and what?
And education is the key going forward.
More awareness.
We have to give young people a voice. We have to educate people. There really needs to be a public health campaign about ADHD, about what it is and what it isn't.
They caught all the wild children and put them in zoos.
They made them do sums and wear sensible shoes.
They put them to bed at the wrong time of day.
And made them sit still when they wanted to play.
They scrubbed them with soap and made them eat peas.
They made them behave and say pardon and please.
They took all their wisdom and wildness away. That's why there are none in the forests today.
What does ADHD mean to you now? In 2018, Daniel Johnson, MSP, brought the motion of the portrayal of ADHD treatment to the Scottish Parliament for debate. Daniel was the first UK politician to not only openly discuss his ADHD diagnosis, but also his use of medication to manage the condition. Here I talked to him about his journey from diagnosis to why he felt the need to speak publicly about his condition and his future hopes for ADHD awareness.
I got diagnosed with ADHD as an adult when I was 35. It was really a result of, I think, a combination of me, finding things extremely difficult. I was running my own business, and I think increasingly sort of chasing my tail and kind of not really doing or delivering kind of what I felt I could or should, and sort of really profoundly feeling like I was letting a lot of people down. Sort of an inevitable knock-on into my personal life. And it was my wife that sort of raised the possibility that maybe this was ADHD. And that led to me seeking a diagnosis and indeed, going on medication, although that was not necessarily a quick route. There was certainly at least, there was 2 or 3 sort of slight dead ends. You're going through psychotherapists and lots of sort of talking therapy, which, and there are lots of people with ADHD who will say that that's a really important way for them to deal with their condition. I have to say, I find with someone with ADHD, I don't have the patience for it. I find it quite excruciating. So that was a bit frustrating. But I mean, I think getting diagnosis and most importantly, you being prescribed medication was pretty transformative. And that's not to say that everything is fixed, but I'm much better able to cope. And I think the best bit of sort of advice or best perspective on all of that I was given was that really, managing ADHD is about pills and skills, and the pills, I think, get you to a point where you can actually seek to implement the skills, but it is definitely both. And to my mind, it is that sequence that for an awful lot of people with ADHD, without medication, that really trying to then implement the skills is difficult, if not impossible. So then I guess that the other key thing to say, sort of following that, obviously became elected to the Scottish Parliament, but basically just found myself increasingly irritated and frustrated about the way that medication was talked about. I mean, in general, regarding mental health, obviously specifically regarding ADHD, which just led to me just saying, enough is enough. I am medicated. It is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. Please stop, talking about prescribing rates as being a bad thing in and of itself. For many people, it's hugely important, and that's kind of really where I ended up becoming somebody as being sort of out and identified as having ADHD in a public position, which I think is actually really important, and really sort of as I move forward, I think trying to encourage other people to be much more open about their own condition.
Do you know actually to date if anybody else has come out with ADHD as a member of Parliament anywhere in the country, or are you still the only one?
There are people that have talked about it, but I don't think they've done it quite so openly as I have.
Right.
The thing that really annoys me, and I probably shouldn't get so annoyed by it, is the number of politicians who you will hear talking about, their autistic child or a child with ADHD or dyslexia, and I have to say I'm at the point where I just want to start asking them, are you talking about your child or are you talking about you? And I mean, the reality is I think politics is an interesting profession because I think it does actually attract people who are neurodivergent. I think the fact that it is quite performative, I think the fact that it is oral, I think the fact that it has lots of sort of rules and has the possibility of making change. If you're someone who is struggles with unwritten social conventions, somebody who is impatient, somebody who wants to see change, somebody who is sort of interested. Oh, that's my phone. Because I think it's quite attractive. So therefore, there are lots of people who I rather suspect are politicians and are non-neurotypical. But they're clearly not being open. It's getting better. So quite a few dyslexic MPs. So and people being open about that on all sides of the House of Commons. That's great. What I'd like is more people with ADHD and autistic spectrum disorder to be the same, because they're definitely there. And some of them I definitely know, and some of them I just suspect.
Yeah. I have a T-shirt which says something like, "I'm not staring at you, I'm diagnosing you." Because when you've been diagnosed yourself, I think you definitely recognise traits in other people.
I guess that's the other thing. This is one of the other elements to the debate. There's definitely those people who meet the diagnostic criteria and thresholds. But then there are many, many, many more people who exhibit traits of all of these neurodivergent conditions. And that's why actually this is so important. It's not just for the people who are diagnosed or diagnosable, but actually understanding the dimensions of the way that different people think differently or perceive the world differently is actually helpful for many more people than the sort of 15 to 20% of people that are diagnosable. I mean, the vast majority of the population will exhibit traits. So actually understanding what these things are and how they work and how you manage them is really important for a huge number of people, not just those with the conditions.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. So based on that, what progress has been made since it was first aired in Parliament in 2018?
I think we are slowly getting neurodiversity on as a general concept into sort of the lexicon of policy speak, which is a good thing. I think we are slowly broadening out the fact that there is a need to consider other conditions, not just autism. And, don't for a moment get me wrong. I mean, I think that the issues faced by autistic people are quite pronounced, and you obviously have people who are autistic with very profound levels of need in a way that you don't really get with ADHD or other neurodevelopmental disorders. But nonetheless, I think autistic people are about 3% of the population, whereas I think the broad spectrum of neurodevelopmental disorders accounts for, as I say, between 15 to 20%. So I think there's a real need to expand that. But there's still a huge amount to achieve. We're nowhere near where we need to be in terms of actually policy, public policy capturing this, and this across the broad spectrum. And I think all too often this gets trapped within a sort of mental health debate, and whether or not is this really mental health? Is it something else? And sometimes you get into the education debate, but I think what we need is actually neurodiversity embedded right the way across public policy. So we're just nowhere near that yet. So that's about, for example, even just starting with education, making sure neurodiversity is really a concept that's embedded across teaching practice, and for the reasons I just set out, that actually it's not just about those people that meet the diagnostic thresholds. That if you look at the bell curve. You drew the lines where people meet diagnostic thresholds. There are lots of people slightly further out on that distribution who are affected, that will have traits but maybe not be diagnosable. So that's really important. But it goes much more broadly than simply health and education. If you look at justice, social security, these are areas which are people with neurodevelopmental disorders are much more likely to come into contact with those services. The statistics around incarceration are absolutely horrific. So, ADHD accounts for, call it 5% of the population, but 25% of the prison population are considered to have ADHD. Autistic people are 2 to 3 times overrepresented in the prison population. Half of all prisoners are dyslexic. What that, to my mind, shows is an absolutely catastrophic failure in public policy in identifying and helping these people at the appropriate time. Because fundamentally, that's what people who find themselves incarcerated, certainly when you look at that global level, that's what it tells you. It is. These are people who've fundamentally been failed by public services and public policy. So we need these concepts embedded right the way across public services, from health to education to justice to social security and beyond. We need approaches to be joined up so that you can identify in one element and make referrals across. And I think until we do that, we're going to continue to fail people with ADHD, but also fail people with other neurodevelopmental disorders as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the golden question that follows that then is, how do we do that?
What I want is it acknowledged. And I think even just requiring people developing public policy, implementing policy, to both acknowledge but also state how they will take account of ADHD and indeed other neurodevelopmental disorders as a whole would make a big difference. So, and so some of this is quite easy. I think even if you looked at some elements of public policy, for example, in tertiary and higher education, if you just required institutions to have policies which made them think about how they both articulate their curricula, how they examine, that alone would make a huge difference to people that have reached that point in education. So some of it is actually not difficult or costly. It's just literally saying you must take account and you must explain how you will deliver to those people that are non-neurotypical. Other elements are probably more difficult and more controversial, but I think definitely ensuring that we have proper cross-referral from education, especially primary and secondary education, into CAMS is really critical. And actually that would help CAMS so that earlier intervention means that you will preempt kind of the various other things that can go wrong if you have people who are undiagnosed. I think probably, well, not probably, and this is more controversial. I mean, I think we should be screening children in primary school for these conditions, using not necessarily at a diagnostic level, so predictive tools that can indicate people that should be referred for assessment. But the other big challenge is that we need to just talk more openly about it. If you look at people with neurodevelopmental disorders, we are some of the people that are still okay to discriminate in society and do so openly. People will casually talk about people being on the spectrum. People will talk about people's spelling and handwriting being a bit dyslexic. People will talk about maybe somebody should be taking their pills. That's unacceptable. Fundamentally, I think that people who have neurodevelopmental disorders, people who are neurodivergent, need to understand that we're being discriminated against, and we need to make this an issue of social justice, but also actually of injustice. Because again, coming back to the prison population, that if any other group in society was, other groups in society who are overrepresented in prison, that is raised as an issue of injustice, and I think we need to do so with this topic, and that's increasingly how I'm understanding it. And I think unless we start getting, unless we become, quite, I don't want to say aggressive, but just clear about those issues, then I think we will struggle to them. So I think we need to get a bit angry. I think we need to be quite vociferous in making those arguments, because I think fundamentally we are letting down millions of people by essentially not properly understanding the issues that they face. And for an awful lot of them, especially people with ADHD, it's treatable. It's very effectively treatable. And so it's an absolute scandal.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the thing is as well, though, like for somebody like me, my primary diagnosis is autism and ADHD is a secondary. So medication doesn't work for me. And in that instance, I think you need to look at the talking therapies a little bit more. I don't think you should ever just diagnose somebody and then give the medication and be like, on your way, because I don't think that's helpful, because there's a lot of strategies you can put in place that help you. Like CBT worked brilliantly for me. I know it doesn't work for everybody. But, I think we've got to go back to early education.
So I think that's right. And I think that's why actually I'm very keen on talking about neurodiversity in the round for lots of different reasons. I think one is that if you over-focus on one of them, I think you miss elements. And actually, by taking a broad approach, I think underlines the fact this is a lot of people. I think when you're talking about 3% of people being autistic or 5% of people ADHD, that sounds pretty niche. But taken together, it's a huge proportion of the population. But they will require slightly different, although connected things. But then the other key thing, which is increasingly interesting, is comorbidity. I don't think these are completely unconnected conditions that are categorized together. I think we will increasingly come to understand that they are essentially different presentations of very similar, or if not the same, underlying neurological issues. So I think it's actually really important to talk about them together and in the round.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I don't think I've ever met one person that... I have met people that have said, I'm only ADHD, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I don't think you are. You've probably got some comorbid conditions. But
so, I mean, I'm not autistic, but I can spot the traits. And sometimes I'm sitting down listening to stuff about autism and go, actually, that's really quite neat. And especially when you think about the social side of things, I mean, that's where there's a really common overlap.
Yeah.
Both people with autism and ADHD really struggle with unwritten social rules and making friendships and things like that. And I've always struggled with that. And I think it's fascinating. I mean, there's a bit of me that's, maybe this is my sort of ADHD impatience. I really want to see where we've got to in 20 years' time in our understanding of these things, because I know it will be quite fundamentally different. And there's so much more that we need to understand about it. And I know we'll make that progress, and I'm quite impatient to see where we get to.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm totally with you. What can I do? What can my industry do? Because obviously, when I leave university, I want to go into my industry and make films and make documentaries and make radio features. What can I do to raise awareness, to make people... I mean, is it just as simple as putting somebody with ADHD in a mainstream show and positively representing them, not negatively, like you see at the moment on TV? I've never seen a positive representation of ADHD on TV.
No, I've never. I mean, this is the thing that sort of was a bit of a penny drop moment. We are starting to see people, positive representations of people with autism on television, but ADHD is still the sort of the awkward child. I mean, it feels like dyslexia was sort of the vanguard, and that was the... It's perfectly acceptable to have dyslexia now, and now we've sort of managed to get autism there, but ADHD is still the one where is it real? Is it just actually an excuse for bad parenting? We really need, I think, positive representation, and it's about people telling stories. I think that one of the issues I think with anything like this is that people will be inclined to try and talk about it just in statistics and kind of things like that. That doesn't really make a difference. What people need is for stories, and that's so from your perspective, absolutely. Whether it's positive portrayals or in fiction, or if it's documentaries, tracking people with ADHD. I mean, I think Rory Bremner has done a huge amount on this in terms of having those documentaries discussing kind of his journey with ADHD. And I think we need other public people with ADHD, and there are an increasing number out there to do the same. And that's why I'm particularly keen on those people, or those politicians with who are non-neurotypical, to be much more open about it and discuss kind of because I think until you do that, until you hear about what it's like, what the issues that are faced and how people overcome them, you're never going to make that progress in terms of general understanding, because it will just be statistics and a sort of a medical name rather than a set of experiences that people can relate to. And that's ultimately how we'll make a difference.
Yeah. And I think from our point of view, especially, I think it's really important for people. My life was a car crash before I got a diagnosis. And that wasn't because getting a diagnosis changed who I was as a person. It was because it changed everybody else's attitude towards me as a person. It was because it opened doors that I couldn't access before with help and assistance. I just needed a little bit of help. I just needed a little bit of adjustments at university. I've always wanted to go there. I've always wanted to get a degree. I've always wanted to do something really productive with my life. and I've never had the opportunity because I had this barrier. And the difference it makes when you get that diagnosis, it really is like the golden ticket. You've just won the lottery. It's just like your life can completely transform. And that sounds dramatic, but it's true.
No, absolutely. And I think the other thing I'd say is that I mean, for me, certainly, it gave me a kind of a set of terms and understandings that allowed me to get to grips with what was going on. And just having that vocabulary to describe, how kind of things are for me and what I have to cope with, that in and of itself, if nothing else, it's why, when people talk about the labels thing, it again irritates me a little bit. Is the diagnosis, in some ways, is neither here nor there. It's the understanding that gives you the terminology and the ability to explain. So for me, it's not the label is pretty uninteresting, but the language and the understanding of terminology is massively useful. And it's why, actually, coming back to that overlap between ADHD and autism, I mean, what I find fascinating is I find an awful lot of that, the understandings around autism incredibly helpful for me as well. And that's because some of them are the same, and some of them are similar, but actually apply in a slightly different way. And that, the more we can build on that and build that sort of understanding and that terminology, the more it's going to be helpful for neurodiverse people. But I genuinely think for everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree, because every adjustment that's ever been put in place for my son in his class has helped everybody in the class. So it never just helps him. So yeah, completely.
Visual timetables are a classic example.
Yeah.
Introduced for children with autism, but I think you now see them in just about every single classroom you ever go into, because every child finds it helpful to know what they're meant to be doing now and what's coming up through the rest of the day, so that they can prepare themselves for what's coming up.
Yeah,
it's just totally. A good idea.
Yeah. So what am I going to do today, going away from this interview, to make a difference?
I think it's just talking and trying to talk to as many people and get as many people to engage as possible. And I think, that's probably a bit unhelpful in terms of being very broad, but I mean, it really is as simple as that. I mean, it's certainly how I view things. I don't think there's any sort of one magic thing that any one person can do, but I think the more we can talk about it, the more that we can impress upon people how much of an issue this is, the better chance we have of making progress.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been really nice speaking to you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My next interview is with Lorna Fotheringham, a support worker at Perth and Kinross ADHD group. Lorna sees stigma and misunderstanding on a daily basis. We spoke about why she thought that was and how we might change it.
I would say it's misunderstood now, because if you go back in decades, 20, 30, 40 years ago or further, people who were neurodiverse were treated as a very different class of people. So if you didn't fit the norm, you were pushed aside. And if you go to my age range, so 40 years ago, you were treated as remedial. And that meant you were of lower intelligence and therefore didn't need as good a teacher, as much input into your schooling. You were basically herded into a room and left. So I think we're still quite misunderstood on what neurodiversity is, but parents of neurodiverse children are getting better at fighting for their kids and what they deserve.
It's weird that they have to do that still, though, isn't it? I mean, it's weird that it's not moved on, and people, with all this information, available at our fingertips and on our phones and everywhere, that people don't know more about it.
Yeah, and I think that now it seems to be the feeling that, we'll just call it ADHD because we don't know what else to call it. So let's diagnose that. So then somebody hears that diagnosis and go, oh, God, another one. But actually, if you revisit your own life, how many neurodiverse people did you meet? And you just didn't realise that was neurodiversity in action because we were so uneducated.
Yeah.
So the more we can educate, the better understood the neurodiverse community will be.
Do you see any stigma or misunderstanding at the group that you work at?
I would say my role at the group, by the time parents come to us at the group, they're at a crisis point in their life with their child, and we're seeing the effects of the stigma and the misunderstanding through the attitude that they have experienced towards them as parents, from other parents, perhaps from family members, older family members, possibly grandparents who think you're doing it wrong. And school teachers, I think our parents often feel very judged and are possibly given 100 different ideas of what they could try to sort this child, but actually the child is neurodiverse. So yes, we see a lot of the effects of stigma and misunderstanding at the group when parents come to us. Definitely.
So if there was more educating the professionals, i.e. teachers and people diagnosing this, then the parents wouldn't get the blame, would they?
Definitely not. I think more awareness, more realisation of what it is these families are living with would allow people to maybe step outside that box that we all live in of what children should be and what school for children should be and what life should be, and just step outside the box and look and see. And I think above all, listen to what these families are telling you they're struggling with.
Yeah, because if they're coming to you at crisis point, that means that they've already tried everything they can think of normally, and they've already educated themselves to a degree where they probably know more than a lot of the teachers about it.
Definitely. And I don't think any mum and dad or parent, carer ever goes, do you know what, I think I'll have a neurodiverse child. So I'm going to read up about all of this beforehand. No, they're reacting to what, as their wee person starts to grow and develop, displays as their norm behaviour.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't think the schools and nurseries help, because I think it's no coincidence that children get diagnosed when they go to school or they go to nursery, because that's when the display of behaviours becomes a problem for society and the way we operate. And then the parents are like, oh, I didn't kind of know that was different if they've only got one child. But then they feel like they're getting penalised for it, even though they didn't even know about it.
Because the tick boxes are there for nursery.
Yeah.
So, so-and-so can't draw an S in the sand. So-and-so doesn't sit still at story time. So they're actually not performing to this tick sheet. But that doesn't mean that there's something not good about them.
Yeah.
I think, and the more that we can share neurodiversity and what it means and what it looks like, the better for all these little people who are amazing and fantastic and have the energy to run around 20.
And out of the box thinkers as well, and innovative. And I mean, they've got so many plus sides that people don't even think about when they think about ADHD.
No, they don't. They don't think of the creativity and the ability to have so many amazing ideas in 60 minutes or the imagination.
1 minute.
To write, to perform, all of these things. It's just
overlooked.
It is, definitely. That's the word, definitely.
Do you think when these parents come to you and they've been kind of rejected by everybody that they thought would help them, that influences people's decisions to get either a diagnosis for their child or themselves?
I think I've seen both kinds of parent. So you have the superpowered parent, in my mind, who knows what their child has and fights for every single thing that child deserves. And they probably have a sixth sense early on that this is where they're heading. So they inform themselves and they find out as much as they can about all the various diagnoses that could be there. And they make sure that they get everything that young person, child, young adult needs, whatever point we meet them at. But then I think there are other parents who are terrified of a diagnosis for what that might mean to this child going forward, because it's quite an isolating diagnosis. And in terms of friendship groups for their child, nobody wants to have the wee person that doesn't get invited anywhere, or no sleepovers, or no, you can't go there for a sleepover. No, you can't play with them because of the perceived unpredictability of neurodiverse kids. And I think there is quite a fear there of how it might impact their adult life if they move up through school trying to hold down a wee job, go to further education, hold down this challenge of a university or college and what that means. You know, I think some parents are really frightened of that for their children. And the other thing I have seen is what I call apples and trees. So you have this child and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So as the child is being diagnosed or going through this journey, there's a bit of a, that reminds me of me. Gosh, maybe should I be getting diagnosed? Yeah. And there have been occasions where a parent has gone through a diagnosis process because they have picked up on so much of their kid, and certain things just fall into place that they go, wow, if I had known this 30 years ago, I might have been a different grown-up.
I think that's why it's important to get a diagnosis, in my opinion. And as somebody that hasn't had one and then had one really late in life, I've lived both sides of it. And I think that label that people are so reluctant to get and so frightened of is the key to unlocking all the services that can help you achieve. And it's trying to make people understand that and not be scared of that.
Adults who are diagnosed, there has to be like taking this really heavy backpack off and going, so that's why all of this was so difficult, because I was having to work twice as hard as anybody else to maintain the in-the-box norm, when really I should have been out of the box and feeling my neurodiversity. It's
you
really
can't achieve what you are capable of because you're constantly living a double life of trying to fit in, and that takes all your time and energy and is exhausting. And so how can you then achieve stuff on top of that? You can't.
I know. It's fascinating. It really is.
Okay, so what would you like people to know about ADHD?
I think the key message is the ADHD is not a choice. It's a neurodiverse condition. It's in your DNA strands. It's not a choice. It's something you're given. It's something you have to learn to live with and learn somehow to love that's who you are.
But do you see a difference in people that have had a diagnosis then? Do you think, or, I mean, I suppose that, again, that's a double-edged sword, because they could get a diagnosis and be all resentful and bitter of it and deny it, or they could get a diagnosis and learn and educate themselves. And then I think that's when your life can change, when you accept it and you try and look for solutions to things.
Yeah, I think if you've had an easier life, so we're not all born into a family that we get brought up in that holds us. So if you've had a hard upbringing, if you've had a hard young adult life, I think it could be like a punch to realise how different your life could have been. But then my colleague will say, well, look at your apples and trees. What were that person's parents living with, and what were their parents like? How were they brought up to know any different ways of bringing up their child? And I think if you're a fortunate young person to be brought up in an understanding home, then you can probably manage your ADHD much better.
I think it's that word, isn't it? It's understanding. You know, out of everybody I've spoken to about this, whether they know about ADHD or not, they either say, I don't understand it, or I do understand it. And it's just that word is massive, huge. You've got two words, haven't you? You've got ignorance and you've got understanding. And those two words can literally shape a person's life.
Yeah.
It's being able to articulate yourself. It's being able to explain why you're doing the things you're doing. And who with ADHD or autism can do that without a lot of help and a lot of understanding? Nobody.
I know.
Well, thanks very much.
No worries. Thank you.
Join me next time when I'll be continuing the ADHD discussion with Dr. Tony Lloyd and Hugo Maynell. This podcast was brought to you by Nicola Foley and Buzzsprout. Music and sound effects from Zapsplat and Adobe. Poem by Jean Willis, read by Zoe Bailey and Ivo DeMeyer. Thank you to my guests, MSP Daniel Johnson, Dr. Tony Lloyd, Lorna Fotheringham and Hugo Maynell.